The words landed harder than the sound of the fork hitting my plate. My wife, Emily, looked directly into my eyes across our dining table and said, "My ex was more of a man than you'll ever be. I regret leaving him." She said it calmly, almost as if she had been waiting all evening to hurt me with those exact words. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Her mother stopped chewing. Her younger brother stared at his glass. Even Emily seemed surprised by the silence that followed. I could have shouted. I could have demanded an explanation. Instead, I simply placed my fork beside my plate and said, "I understand." What she didn't know was that those two words were not acceptance. They were the beginning of a decision I had already started making in my mind. Our marriage had never been perfect, but I had always believed it was worth protecting. We had been married for 7 years, and during those years, I had worked hard to build a stable life for both of us. I wasn't rich, and I wasn't the kind of husband who bought expensive gifts every weekend, but I paid the bills, kept my promises, helped around the house, and stood beside Emily whenever life became difficult. When her father became sick, I was the one driving him to appointments. When Emily lost her job, I supported her without making her feel guilty. I thought those things mattered. Apparently, they didn't matter as much as whatever image of masculinity existed in her memory of another man. Her ex, Daniel, had been part of her past for years, but suddenly, at that dinner, he became the standard by which she measured everything I was. I spent the rest of dinner almost completely silent. Emily continued eating as if she hadn't just shattered something between us. Her mother eventually whispered, "Emily, that was unnecessary." Emily shrugged and replied, "I was just being honest." That sentence bothered me more than the insult itself. Honesty without compassion can become cruelty. I looked around the table and realized something uncomfortable. Everyone had heard what she said, but nobody knew what I was thinking. They expected me to defend myself, maybe argue with her, perhaps leave the house dramatically. Instead, I asked for the check. Emily looked confused. "That's it?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes." On the drive home, she tried to explain that she had been angry and didn't mean everything literally. I didn't respond. She didn't realize that I wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. I was trying to understand whether my marriage still existed. That night, Emily went to bed without another serious conversation. I remained downstairs, sitting alone in the dark living room. I opened an old storage box where I kept photographs, documents, and memories from our early years together. There were pictures of our first apartment, our wedding, our first vacation, and the tiny restaurant where we celebrated our second anniversary. In almost every photograph, Emily was smiling at me like I was the person she wanted beside her forever. I wondered when that changed. Then I found something I hadn't looked at in years, an old handwritten note from Emily. It said, "Thank you for choosing me every day." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Am I still choosing someone who no longer chooses me? I didn't cry. I simply understood that love couldn't survive if one person kept treating the other like an inferior replacement. The next morning, Emily seemed to expect everything to return to normal. She made coffee, checked her phone, and casually asked whether I was still upset about dinner. I told her I'm not angry. She smiled, probably relieved. Then she asked, "So we're okay?" I looked at her and said, "No, we're not." Her smile disappeared. I explained that what she said wasn't just an insult. She had compared the man she married to another man, and openly said she regretted choosing me. "If that's genuinely how you feel," I told her, "I won't compete with someone from your past." She immediately became defensive. She said Daniel was just a memory and that she had spoken out of frustration. But then she added something that changed everything. "Maybe you should have been more like him." I nodded slowly. That was the moment I stopped trying to convince her that I was enough. Over the next few days, I became strangely calm. I didn't monitor her phone. I didn't interrogate her about Daniel. I didn't threaten divorce. Instead, I began organizing my life as if I were responsible for protecting my own future. I reviewed our finances, gathered important documents, contacted a lawyer for general information, and started considering where I would live if the marriage ended. Emily noticed the change almost immediately. She asked why I wasn't jealous anymore. I told her, because jealousy won't fix disrespect. She expected anger, but my calmness frightened her more. One evening she asked, "Are you planning something?" I replied, "Yes." Her face tightened. "What?" I looked at her and said, "I'm planning to stop begging someone to appreciate me." She laughed nervously, thinking I was being dramatic. She had no idea how serious I was. A week later, Emily received an unexpected invitation to meet Daniel. Apparently, he had returned to the city after several years away. She told me about it casually, perhaps expecting me to become jealous. Instead, I said, "You should go." She stared at me. "You don't care." I answered, "I care enough to let you find out whether the man you remember is actually the man you miss." That response unsettled her. She asked whether I was testing her. I said no. I genuinely wanted the truth, even if the truth destroyed our marriage. She met Daniel at a cafe. I didn't follow her. I didn't send anyone after her. I stayed home and waited. 3 hours later, Emily returned looking completely different. She didn't seem excited. She looked confused, almost disappointed. She sat down and remained silent for several minutes before finally saying, "He's not who I remembered." I didn't celebrate. I didn't say "I told you so." I simply asked what happened. Emily explained that Daniel had spent most of the meeting talking about himself. He complained about his job, blamed other people for his problems, and repeatedly brought up old arguments. The confident man she had remembered was partly a creation of nostalgia. She had remembered his strengths and forgotten why they broke up. Then Daniel had asked about her marriage. When she told him that she regretted leaving him, he apparently laughed and said, "You always romanticize the past when you're unhappy with the present." Emily said those words hit her hard. She finally understood that she had compared reality with a carefully edited memory. But then she looked at me and whispered, "That still doesn't excuse what I said to you." I nodded. For the first time, she sounded genuinely ashamed. The following evening, Emily placed a folder on the kitchen table. I opened it and saw photographs, letters, and old messages from our marriage. "I found these while looking through our things," she said. She showed me a picture of us during the hardest year of our marriage. Her father had been sick, she had lost her job, and I had been working extra hours. In the photograph, she was asleep against my shoulder while I looked exhausted. On the back, she had written, "He stayed when everything was falling apart." She began crying. "I forgot who you were," she whispered. "No," I replied quietly. "You forgot what I did because you started measuring me against someone who wasn't even part of our life anymore." She agreed. But forgiveness was not automatic. Love could survive mistakes, but trust needed to be rebuilt. That night, I finally told Emily the part she didn't know. Before she met Daniel, before she insulted me at dinner, I had already been considering whether our marriage was becoming unhealthy. I had noticed the constant comparisons, the emotional distance, and the way she dismissed my efforts. I had even drafted a separation plan, but never acted on it because I still loved her. "Your words at dinner didn't create the problem," I said. "They revealed how serious it had become." Emily looked devastated. "Were you really going to leave me?" she asked. I answered honestly. I was preparing myself to. She covered her face with her hands. For the first time, she understood that my silence at dinner wasn't weakness. I had been silent because I was deciding whether there was still something worth saving. The next morning, I gave her a choice instead of an ultimatum. I told her that if she genuinely wanted our marriage, she would have to prove it through actions, not emotional promises. We would need counseling. We would need boundaries. No more comparisons to ex-partners. No humiliating each other in front of family. No using old relationships as weapons during arguments. And most importantly, we would both have to admit that love alone wasn't enough. Emily agreed, but she also asked me something unexpected. "What if you never look at me the same way again?" I answered, "Then I'll be honest with you instead of pretending." She started crying. "I don't want to lose you," I replied. "Then don't just be afraid of losing me. Become someone who doesn't make me feel like losing you is my only way to respect myself." Months passed, and our relationship slowly changed. It wasn't a magical transformation. There were difficult conversations, uncomfortable counseling sessions, and moments when old resentment resurfaced. Emily had to confront why she had romanticized Daniel and why she had used him as a weapon against me. I had to confront my own habit of staying silent when something hurt me. We learned that silence could sometimes preserve peace, but could also allow resentment to grow. Eventually, Emily stopped comparing me to anyone. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, she looked at me and said, "I used to think being a man meant being louder, tougher, and more impressive. Now I understand that real strength can look like staying when things are difficult, admitting when you're wrong, and knowing when to walk away." I didn't answer immediately. I simply smiled. A year after that dinner, we sat at the same table where everything had nearly ended. Emily reached across and held my hand. She said, "I still regret something." I looked at her. She continued, "I regret making you believe that you had to compete with another man to deserve my love." I squeezed her hand, and "I regret believing that silence was always the strongest response," I told her. We both laughed quietly. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was honest now. The cruel sentence she had spoken that night had almost destroyed us, yet it forced both of us to face truths we had avoided for years. I never became Daniel. I never needed to. Emily finally understood that the man she had been comparing me to was a memory, while I was the person who had actually stood beside her when life became difficult. And my next move wasn't revenge. It was choosing whether our marriage deserved another chance, and making sure she knew that this time I was choosing myself too.